Bibles to Titus chapter 2 and verse 6. Titus chapter 2 and verse 6 as we continue in our study in this particular chapter. This is a very short verse, Titus chapter 2 and verse 6, and this sums up the Apostle Paul's instruction for young men in the church. And this is what he says. Titus chapter 2 verse 6, likewise urge the younger men to be self-controlled. The title for our study this morning is God's View of Teenagers. God's View of Teenagers. We're looking at the different age and gender groups that the Apostle Paul addresses here in chapter 2 of Titus. Here he shows God's standard of character and conduct for the old and the young, men and women, ministers and slaves. And one of the things that you will observe in this section is that Paul does not have one general advice that fits all of these different groups. Men and women are different from each other. Different age groups have different needs. And this is very good to remember. Ministers of the gospel, counselors, and those involved in helping people should remember that if they are to effectively minister to people, they must meet their different needs. Hindi pwedeng isang counsel at para sa lahat. Kailangan i-distinguish mo, ito matanda ito na lalaki, ganito ang counsel rito. Ito matandang babae, ganito ang counsel dito. Ito batang babae, ganito rin ang counsel rito. Ito batang lalaki, iba rin ang approach dun sa kanya. That's how the Apostle Paul does it. Speaking to young pastors of that day, 16th century English minister Richard Baxter, who is also the author of the book Reformed Pastor, has this to say. Tingnan nyo yung papano, ito yung counsel ni Richard Baxter sa mga younger pastors. How can they be more effective in their ministry? Listen to what he says. See also that when you are ministering to individuals, your own manners reflect the character of what you are communicating. So, speak appropriately and therefore differently to each one. To the dull and the obstinate, be blunt and earnest. To the tender-hearted and the fearful, be gentle and insist on the need of their spiritual direction. To the young, lay more stress on the enticements of sensual pleasures and of the great need to have control over their passions. To the old, prepare them for death and for the need to withdraw from the foolish ways of this present world. To the young, be free, and to the old, be respectful. To the rich, preach self-denial and the deceitfulness of prosperity. To the poor, show the glory of the gospel. Note, too, the temptation of each group, each sex, each profession, and each one's employment. Be as simple and humble before them as you can. Give them scriptural evidence for all that you may say. Then they will see that it is not just you, but God who is speaking to them. Be serious in all things, but especially in the way that you apply the truth to their specific needs. Kita nyo, dapat ganyan daw ang pastor. Dapat ganyan ang nagka-counsel sa mga taong gusto nilang tulungan. I-identify nila ng mabuti, ano ba ang particular need nitong taong ito? Ano ba ang sinasabi ng salita ng Panginoon Diyos tungkol dito sa kanilang mga concerns? Yan ang makikita natin sa Bible. Look at Ephesians, look at Colossians. What do you find? When Paul starts to address different groups of people, different genders, when he addresses the men or the husbands, he has a specific counsel for them. When he addresses women, he has something to say to them that's different from what he said to the men. He has something to say to parents, different from what he said to children. Iba-iba. He has a different counsel for slaves. He has a different counsel for masters. Yan ang makikita nating approach ni Apostle Paul. Being sensitive to the needs of these different groups of people and addressing them appropriately. That's the reason why we're taking time to look at, for example, this point, as we look at young men tinitingnan natin, what are the things that God wants to say to young men? Ano sinasabi ng salita ng Panginoon Diyos specifically para sa kanilang mga concerns? Now today we're gonna continue to look at young men, and particularly focusing on teenagers. Why do I do that? Well, because last time I shared with you that the age group that's included in the younger men may start from age 13 up to indefinitely. We're not sure up to how old that the young men would include, but as I mentioned before, it could include any person who feels he's young, he feels that he's strong, he feels that he's quick, and he feels that he is not yet very stable regarding his emotions. That could be a person in his late 30s or in his early 40s, pwedeng kasama doon. Kaya malawak itong sinasaklaw ng 13 ng young men. Bakit ko sinabi, by the way, 13 years old? Because of the tradition that they have among the Jews, or the ceremony that they have among Jewish boys, which is called the bar mitzvah. Kung babae naman, if it's a girl, it's called bat mitzvah. The bar mitzvah is a ceremony that marks the transition point between childhood and adulthood for Jewish boys. And so from 13 years old up to about early 40s, late 30s, kasama pa yun dito sa tinatawag na young men. Okay, kaya kung kayo, kahit na kayo ay nasa 40 na, pero ang feeling nyo, maliksi pa ako, mabilis pa ako. Kaya ko pang sabayan itong mga 20-year-old na mga basketball player. Kung ganun pa rin ang pakiramdam mo, and at the same time, medyo nararamdaman mo sa iyong sarili, medyo batang isip ka pa, tama-tama sa iyo yan. Young men ka pa rin. Young man ka pa rin, no? Kasama ka pa rin doon. Okay, so, however, having said that, dahil itong range na to, masyado malawak ito, 13 years old up to 40 years old, we all know that teenagers belonging to the young men have different struggles compared to those who are already in their 40s. Di ba? Obvious naman yun eh. No, pagdating nitong puberty stage na to, 13 years old up to 19 years old, iba yung kanilang needs compared dito sa mas mga nakakatanda within the range of what we call young men. And so today, dahil baka hindi na ako mabigyan ng ganitong opportunity, I want to address this particular segment within that group that we call young men. I want to address teenagers. I want us to see God's view of teenagers. And here is how our study will go about. I want us to look at the general characteristics of teenagers. Secondly, I want us to look at a wrong view of teenagers. Thirdly, I want us to look at a biblical view of teenagers. And finally, I want us to look at biblical goals for teenagers. What does God want for teenagers? Ano gusto ng Panginoon para sa kanila? Okay? And so that's how our study will go about, and I hope and pray that this identification of teenagers will help those who are ministering to them to be more effective in the help that they want to provide this group of people. Okay, let's start with the first point. General characteristics of teenagers. It's very interesting. Itong study ko patungkol dito when I was gathering all of this data pertaining to this particular age group. Very interesting. Natutuwa ako dun sa nakita ko because I was trying to look at my own life when I was still a teenager. And I said, sabi ko, eto nga talaga yung mga nararamdaman ko nung panahon na yon. Now listen carefully kung ano-ano yon. Okay, number 1. Here are general characteristics of teenagers. Number 1, teens experience big changes physically. They experience big changes physically. Their body proportions are becoming like that of adults. And the growth is usually rapid, especially in height. Females usually develop about 2 years ahead of males. No, kahit na siguro ang isang babae 13 years old at yung kapatid niya ay 15 years old, parang makikita mo, bakit magsing height lang kayo? Akala ko mas matanda pa tong babae kaysa dun sa kanyang kuya. No, basta kahit na 2 taon yung kanilang agwat, parang ang bilis lumaki ng babae. No? Yan ang mapapansin natin. At kadalasan ng mangyayari, pagdating ng vacation time, pagpasukan na naman, pagbalik ng mga teenager sa kanilang school, sasabihin ng mga teachers nila o ng mga ibang parents na nakakita sa kanila, "Uy, binata ka na. Uy, dalagang-dalaga ka na." We commonly hear those terms. And another thing that we observe pertaining to this, in connection to these changes, physical changes, they have an enormous appetite, these teenagers. No, yung mga, napansin niyo ba sa mga teenagers, sa mga lalaki? Grabe, lakas kumain. Yan isang bagay na mapapansin natin sa kanila. Dahil sa adjustment na nangyari physically, ganun din pagdating sa kanilang pagkain. Skeleton grows quicker than muscles, and at this period, teenagers can feel very awkward. No, kaya yung mga itsura nila parang masyadong lanky, payat, pero parang ang hahaba ng mga buto, pero payat ang itsura nila. And so they feel quite awkward pagka tinitingnan nila yung kanilang sarili sa lamin. Parang ang haba na kanilang leeg, haba na kanilang paang, haba na kanilang binti. Di ba? Ganun na kanilang napapansin. Voices of boys begin to crack. Di ba? Kaya nga yan, sinasabi na ng mga tao, "Oy, binata na." O, tinan mo yung boses niya. O, lalaking-lalaki na. I remember Jotham, one of the teenager kids of one of our members. I was surprised when I heard his voice the other day. Pagsalita niya, "Oh, kumusta ka na?" Ba, parang, ang laki na ng boses ah. Sabi ko, "Jotham, binatang-binata ka na." His voice began to crack. Yung voice niya talagang mas masculine na yung dating. Lalaking-lalaki na kumbaga. There's also rapid heart activity according to doctors. This is the reason of rising blood pressure, headaches, getting tired quickly. And this can lead to frequent changes in the mood and general emotional instability. Ito rin yung age na ito, under this, that many teenagers begin to have problems with their skin, especially on their faces and scalp. Ito yung panahon na makikita mo maraming pimples o maraming balakubak, dandruff. Sexual maturity also is accompanied by physical and emotional changes. Okay? So yan ang experience sila pagdating mga big changes physically. Now let's go to the next point. Teens are extremely concerned with their own bodies and appearance. Pagdating ng teenage years, masyado na nilang pinapansin yung kanilang muka, yung kanilang katawan, yung kanilang itsura. Girls tend to feel more insecure about their bodies than boys. And why? Well, because boys don't have to adjust to any experience equivalent, for example, to menstruation. Wala namang ganun yung lalaki eh. Kaya yung babae, pag nagkaroon na ng ganun, parang, "Ano tong nangyari sa akin, mama? Bakit ganito?" Diba? They're really adjusting. Hindi nila alam kung what's happening to their bodies. Girls also feel dissatisfaction, particularly on breast size, weight, and facial characteristics. Diba? Sa mga lalaki, hindi naman normal na bigla na lang lalaki yung kanilang mga breasts. Pagka nagkaganon, talagang mamumroblema ka na talaga sa teenager mong lalaki, no? Pero yung mga babae, meron mga ganun experience. Sabi, "Oh, ano nangyari sa akin, mama? Oh, dapat anak, magsuot ka na ng bra." Oh, dati hindi naman ganun. They really just feel awkward regarding all of these changes. Teens worry about their appearance also. Do they have the right clothes? Are they wearing them right? What will their friends think about this shirt, this dress, this new haircut, glasses, shoes, cellphone? No? Baka sabihin lang, "Ang baba naman ng model na cellphone mo. Bakit ganyan lang yan? Dapat ganito ang cellphone mo." Teens also spend fully half of their lives in front of a mirror. They get so worried about that one pimple. They pester their moms to buy that face cleanser or pimple remover advertised on television to do wonders on their face and attract friends. Teens worry about being normal. One time I read this story from David Paul Tripp. He was talking to his son, and suddenly sabi na lang bigla nung teenager son niya, "Dad, what do you think of my ears?" "What do I think of your ears? What's wrong with your ears?" Ganun eh. Sa sobrang consciousness minsan ng mga teenager, parang ang tingin nila, "Papa, ang laki-laki ng tenga ko." Ang laki ng tenga mo. Normal lang naman yan ah. Bakit ngayon mo lang napansin na ganyan ang tenga mo? Teenagers. Number 3, teens tend to change in the way they relate with their parents. No? Iba na sila makipag-relate sa mga parents sila. Teens feel grown and their relations with parents change. They want to have more independence. They think they know it all. They tend to have a lower opinion of their parents because they now realize that their parents are not perfect and they could now more easily identify their faults. Ganyan na yung mga teenager eh. Kita na nila, talagang, mama ko, mali yung decision sa ganito. Papa ko, mali sa ganito. Papa ko, ganito pala, tamad, o kung ano man. Napapansin na nila yon. Dati, hindi. They now search for new people to love in addition to parents. And communication with friends takes a very important place in their lives. For many, it becomes even more important than communicating with their own parents.